Learning the guitar, one of the most exciting and yet frustrating things for any new musician.
This is Anyone Can Play Guitar, the podcast for musicians and music lovers that takes you behind the scenes of the music industry. This week is brought to you in partnership with MGR Music. Ever wanted to learn an instrument, hone your skills, or pick up something completely new? You can get so far by yourself, however professional guidance can make all the difference. With a network of tutors right across the UK and rates starting from as little as £15 per hour, visit mgrmusic.com now to get started. Hello and welcome to episode 55 on Learning the Guitar with me, James, and him, Ben. A bit loud.
A little bit.
I was excited.
You really were.
Last week we covered time management and decision making, where we heard from loads of great artists, including John Fratelli.
Would you recommend doing that?
I wouldn't recommend that
Okay,
at all.
yeah.
No, that was a really unintelligent thing to have done.
Any particular reason?
Again, I wish I had a good answer for that. Just purely sort of immaturity and inexperience.
Check out the episode to find out what decision John's talking about. Really good episode last week, James. Now on to today, and we're talking about, wait for it, learning the guitar.
It's been a long time coming, I guess, Ben.
For Anyone Can Play Guitar podcast, we should really do an episode about guitars.
Yeah. And we did, to be fair,
Mm-hmm.
cover a little bit of this back in season 1.
Yeah.
Episode 3 of the show
Yes,
with Ross from the Future Heads. That was some time ago.
it was when we met them in the Split Chimp.
Yes, very nice.
Yeah.
Today we've got Matthew Rusk, who is the founder of MGR Music,
Our partner.
our partner for season 2. And we've also got Leigh Fuge,
Mm-hmm.
and he's done a lot of work with Matthew. He featured very briefly at the back end of last week, you'll remember.
They will. I will.
Everyone will. But to point you in the direction of season 1, here's a little clip from that episode with Ross.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long journey, isn't it? You know, I think any guitarist out there knows that it doesn't happen overnight.
So today, you can expect a bit of this.
And then you kind of get to this phase where you can start looking at things like power chords or bar chords, and that is such a significant moment for any student.
And a bit of this.
But if you're only watching a video of someone showing you what that chord is, you'd never think about, or maybe I should move my thumb slightly.
Remember, a great way to support the show is to go on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and give us a rating and a review. It really does make a massive difference for the show. Now, on with the episode. Right, so here's the deal, Ben. You can go to YouTube and there's loads of tutorials about starting to learn to play the guitar, various different instructional videos.
There's lots.
Some of them are very good.
I have used them myself.
Lee himself is actually in the process of doing some himself.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not to be discounted, and that's all fine. However,
Mm-hmm.
can have its limitations.
Yes, you really can.
I, for one, remember attempting to learn to play the guitar, and as much as I could look at someone else playing it, I needed to go, Ben, my hand just can't move from there to there. What do I need to do? I couldn't do that with a video.
No.
How can I actually get my fingers from that position to that position? Quite tricky.
It is.
And painful.
It can be.
With Matthew and Leigh, though, we've got two people who have absolutely years and years of experience teaching the guitar. So they can share a fair bit of insight into what a prospective guitar player should realistically expect when they start to learn the guitar. We're going to start with Leigh. Before we've even started, we asked, whether this is a young person's game, learning the guitar, or does age not matter? Yeah.
Yes and no, in my experience. So I think younger people definitely pick up the sort of the general understanding maybe a bit quicker, and maybe some of the motor skills come a bit quicker to a younger student. But what I often find with older students is the big difference is, in terms of progression, is when I was either 11 or 12 when I started playing, and I was in a position where I could come home from school every day by 4 o'clock. I'd pick the guitar up and I'd play until 10:30 at night. I'd go to bed. I'd get up an hour early in the morning to have an extra hour before school to play. I'd take my guitar to school, practice in the lunch break. So I was consistently with a guitar in my hand. But when you sort of find, an adult decides at some point to pick a guitar up, by that point in life, you've already got other commitments, like, a full-time job, maybe you've got a family. So there's a lot of other variables in the fold there where, you can't commit that much time to playing. So I think that's where the myth came from, in that, younger people obviously have a lot more disposable time. Whereas, I suppose if you were, let's say, 36 and you had 2 kids and a full-time job, and someone said, right, you've got to practice for 5 hours a day, you think, well, where am I going to find where am I going to find that 5 hours?
Good question though, James, is what about a student's personal circumstances? How can that influence how best to learn the guitar?
Oh, of course, yeah, and it also depends what their goals are. I like to get to know the person that I teach. So I've spoke to loads of different teachers over the time I've been doing it about how we all approach it, because I don't think there's a set method for teaching guitar. I think everyone's kind of got their own way with doing it. And some people like to follow a rigid, this is how I teach, this is lesson 1, this is lesson 2, and that applies to everyone. But I like to get to know the person and get to know, what their routines are. And because I think the big trick is, especially when dealing with, people with less time to practice, is finding ways to give them something that they can get the most quality in a short space of time. Rather than say, right, this is going to take you 6 hours, maybe there's something intense you can work on for 20 minutes a day that will get you, the same results over, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is that, you sort of sit there and work on it. So I think it's about trying to find out how you can give people things that benefit them with, I suppose, the minimal disruption to their routines. Because I think you never want practicing to be seen as a burden. And especially when you have other commitments in life, like I made the joke about finding 5 hours a day to practice, it's just not realistic. So I think it's all about finding how do you get the most out of people's time, without impacting their time as well.
So not to worry there if you don't have loads of spare time on your hands. So aside from not having the time, what are some of the other frustrations that students often have?
Well, the one you've mentioned is a big one, sort of fear of not being able to remember things, because obviously, as when you learn, there's a lot of things to remember, and how do you remember 1,001 different things in a language that you learned 3 weeks beforehand? One thing I've noticed, and I don't know whether this is sort of, I guess, maybe my sort of interpretation of the way people view things in 2018, but I think younger students especially get frustrated at the idea of the guitar now being a long-term thing. And I think the way that people have been kind of conditioned these days, I think, is to, everything's instant now, isn't it? Everything's like instant gratification. You look something and it's there. You have it straight away. You don't have to, you've got things like Amazon Prime. You don't need to go to the shop anymore because you buy something online and it'll be delivered to your house in less than 24 hours,
Yeah.
Everything's so instant now. And I think if you turn around and say to someone, well, this thing's going to take you at least a couple of months to get proficient, and then if you want to get really good, you're talking, 10 years plus. And I think that can frustrate people a little bit, because I think the way that, I guess modern conveniences have pushed people is that everything is so instant, you almost don't have to work at anything these days. But the guitar is something that you still have to put the time into and, actually do some work.
Building on today's cultural norm, James, of wanting everything instantly and for free.
That is what people want.
Mm-hmm. Just for the record, you still can get this podcast instantly and for free.
That's true facts.
Yeah. How far can someone realistically get by watching YouTube videos versus actual lessons?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of things that you can't cover in a video. There's certain little things like hand positioning, or even just the need to ask someone a question. I think that's where video and, written tuition sort of struggles, because you can't actually physically say to someone, what am I doing wrong? All you've got is you watch this video of someone else doing it, and then you have to replicate that.
This is also backed up by Matthew.
And I think it's a really interesting point to pick up on. And for me, a few years ago, with the teachers I work with, there was a concern of, will YouTube, outcompete music teachers? And actually, I had a very different response to this. Is that YouTube is great as a resource, and there's many different videos and teachers out there. But what I find that particularly beginner students need more than anything is someone that can curate the information, the learning process for them, so they know what is a logical process to go through for song 1, song 2, song 3, etc., so that they can learn in a way that is really constructive and builds upon the knowledge that they've learned during that process. The thing that makes YouTube really challenging as a platform is, as a beginner student, you might not know what is a good song to start off with. I've had students turn up to lesson and want to learn Jimi Hendrix in the first lesson, which is just, no one's going to be able to do that during the first lesson. And yet, on YouTube, there'll be lessons out there, and they'll be trying to play these songs that actually are, several steps ahead of where they are. And that makes for a very frustrating process. So YouTube is a great resource, but I say having someone who can create that knowledge is something that's really useful where music teachers come in.
You can see how a music teacher who's been on a learning journey with a student can better curate a lesson and give feedback.
So
Big topic from a few weeks ago, James.
If you're doing a
feedback, that is.
chord with a particularly awkward
whereas
stretch,
a video is generic and not really
position
specifically
of your thumb,
tailored to that
difference
individual student.
getting your fingers to the right place.
That's a big difference.
But if you're only watching a video of someone showing you what that chord is,
actually teaching
you'd never think
knows
about
which bits you've struggled
or maybe
at,
I should move my
which
thumb
bits you've
slightly.
been good at. How
But
to
what
then
if I
potentially
straighten my
plan the
elbow
next
or bend my
lesson,
elbow
or,
this way?
Actually, you've done that
That's
bit
something
quite
that
well.
someone who
Jump
knows
onto
that
this bit.
that piece can,
Exactly.
can
And
sit
I
with you
think
and say, oh,
from
well, why
my
don't you try this
experiences
and
of teaching guitar,
see if that makes a
trying to
difference.
get those songs which will hit with the person. For example, one of my students, his wife loved the Rolling Stones, so I taught him Can't Get No Satisfaction. He loved it.
Yeah. Well, it's a big difference learning something that you really like, rather than, that's the one video tutorial that I could find that is actually going to work for us, but they're teaching something else. So, how important can the regular scheduling of lessons be with goal setting?
Oh yeah, absolutely. People will always want to do it because they never want to show up and say that they haven't done it. You know, and I'm quite laid back as a teacher. I always sort of say to people, it is what it is. You can only fit so much into your regular schedules, but that definitely exists so that people don't want to feel like, they don't want to feel like they've almost embarrassed themselves, I suppose, is a good way to look at it. They've shown up and you've given them something to practice, but they haven't practiced it. So I think that knowledge does tend to push people a little bit, because you sort of think, well, yeah, if I'm going to go back there and show him that I've practiced it, I probably should practice it.
Yeah.
Or at least attempt to.
Another common question for people picking up a guitar for the first time: what type of guitar should they buy? So many options. So many wonderful options, James.
I often ask the question of, well, what do you listen to? Who are your favourite guitar players? If you turn around and say, you like Led Zeppelin, then you want a Les Paul. If you turn around and say you like Eric Clapton, then you want a Strat. There's certain things that can be answered with a question, I think.
What about if your budget's tight though?
Even I only started playing in the early 2000s, and if you spent less than £200 on a guitar then, it was just rubbish. But now you can pick up a £250, £300 guitar, and you can go off and tour with it, and it's just as good as anything. So I think the margins for low-priced guitars, the quality of them has increased so much. Even when you think those Bachman Squires that people used to get from Argos, those are pretty good these days. They've come on so far. Really? What they were, 15, 20 years ago.
Whether you're thinking of taking up guitar lessons or becoming a teacher yourself, what sort of traits should you be looking for or possess?
The immediate one that springs to mind is patience, for example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd really agree with patience. I also think there is this kind of level of understanding of what it's like to sit in the student's shoes. So empathy is a really big one. And what I mean by that is when you start teaching guitar, it's been so long since you were terrible at guitar, you've literally forgotten what it's like to be a beginner student. And what I mean is, specifically, you might have a student come into a lesson and they physically don't have the strength in their fingers to fret a note. They can just make some kind of buzzy sound out of the guitar. And that is the level that you need to be pitching your first few lessons to a very nervous beginner guitar student. And actually, we often forget as more advanced guitarists just what a basic stage we were during our first few months, where we didn't know how to hold a plectrum and we couldn't even hear if our guitar was in or out of tune, and we forget all of that stuff because we're advanced guitarists now. So empathy for me is the big one, and understanding what it's like to be in the student's shoes is a must for good music teachers.
What sort of environment should you look for in terms of the space and the room that you're going to learn in?
One thing I can say, and we've got quite a lot of data on this, is if you have a good learning environment, the longevity of the students that you will teach in terms of how long will they stay a student of yours increases massively, because people love to turn up to a place where they feel that it's got a great atmosphere, great environment, and it's going to be the obvious things. It's going to be, how much light does that room have? Is it quite a nice warm environment where you feel that you're welcomed and you feel that you're safe in that place? Is it an environment where all the resources are kind of immediately to hand, or is a teacher having to walk off to go and find something elsewhere in the house? Having good quality equipment is a bonus, but it's not necessarily the most important thing as you're starting out. Students are able to and normally quite open to learning on pretty average equipment if the lessons are really good. So I would be more enthusiastic about a teacher finding a really nice location to teach from, making the location really accessible, really nice location to teach from, rather than buying an expensive guitar and sitting in a really dark, mouldy old room somewhere and trying to teach from there. So I'd really consider those elements of it. There are many teachers that I work with that have thought quite carefully about different things that they have in and around the room to create that atmosphere, whether it's posters of musicians they like, small bits of music memorabilia, musical notes on the wall. All of these different things add to what is a customer experience. It's a student turning up and feeling that they're really getting something, not just the lesson information, the content. Often they're building a relationship with the music teacher and really feeling very connected to that teacher. And at the same time, they're feeling like they're really looking forward to going to that physical location where their music lessons take place, because it's a really nice place to learn.
So, you've got your guitar, which was quite difficult for me, James, being left-handy.
Yeah, wrong way around.
Yeah. The room is set up and you're ready to learn. Do you start with chords or tab? For Leigh, it was chords.
Only because I think it's quite good to be able to go away from your first lesson playing a little tune. I always show people the first lesson. I always show people E minor and A major, because you can string those two chords together really simply.
Yeah.
And I teach people straight away. The first thing I show them is those two chords and how to play a 4-beat rhythm. Just simple 1, 2, 3, 4, and then change chord. Because straight away there you've got two chords and you can play in time. I think it's the most encouraging way. If you can get people playing something that they can recognize very quickly, then it doesn't matter that the next steps are going to be hard, because obviously we all know what it's like learning bar chords and, and all that sort of stuff. But if you can get people playing something quick, I think the encouragement then pushes you through the difficult stuff. Because then you can say, well, actually, do you know what? While I'm working on difficult stuff, I can still be learning other things that I can.
Back to Matthew, who has a similar view for those first few lessons.
I mean, that's a really great point. And ultimately, I've worked with many kind of guitarists that are kind of entering into this industry as early stage guitar teachers. And I'm very interested in working closely with guitar teachers to formulate what I would call like a foundation course of guitar lessons. So when someone turns up with a guitar that they don't know how to play. Where do you start? And often there are common themes of places to start from. So, for example, there's some key riffs that most guitar students start with. Something like Seven Nation Army, for example, is a great and classic riff for students to learn. And often it's about helping these students feel comfortable during their first lesson and feel like they've learned something and something they can build on. And as the first kind of, let's say, 5 to 8 lessons go by, you're just building on these skill sets, increasing their finger strength through a range of different simple riffs, maybe looking at some like open chords, so just getting into this understanding that they can use some different kind of chord shapes and movements between them and being practiced. And then you kind of get to this phase where you can start looking at things like power chords or bar chords, and that is such a significant moment for any student, because as everyone knows, bar chords are particularly difficult to play and particularly frustrating for beginner stage guitarists, in the sense that actually trying to get any sound out of these bar chords is a real nightmare. So having particular songs that you can draw upon that makes that process easier. So, for example, when I would kind of build up towards this, I might use something like Brain Stew by Green Day is a great one in terms of being able to move these power chords down in one position, and it's just helping that student kind of move from fret to fret, but keeping that same finger shape there. It's just building up this kind of finger strength, and then you start looking at other songs that might enable them to do kind of full bar chords and moving between bar chords and open chords, and actually that kind of building that kind of curriculum, you can select particular songs that really help students kind of go through the process of building the foundations of learning to play guitar. And then what you do is you kind of weave in along the way the musical interests they have. So they might turn up and say they want to play Ed Sheeran or they want to play Metallica, but you need to weave these different genres and styles into their learning so they feel like it's a personalised learning.
This week is brought to you in partnership with MGR Music. Ever wanted to learn an instrument, hone your skills, or pick up something completely new? You can get so far by yourself, however professional guidance can make all the difference. With a network of tutors right across the UK and rates starting from as little as £15 per hour, visit mgrmusic.com now to get started.
Now it's time for our regular good cause slot. This week it's Leigh's choice.
Probably the charity that is closest to me at the moment, just from some recent family things, would be MacMillan, which is a cancer support charity. So I definitely say those would be, if people are going to give some money towards something, I think that's a good cause. Yeah. Any animal charity for that matter as well. Anything that helps preserve animals is always good with me.
You can find out more at macmillan.org.uk. That's MacMillan.org.uk. And now back to the episode.
Before the break, Matthew touched on bar chords.
I'm not going to lie to you, James, I love a bar chord. You do not.
I love the sound they make.
Yes.
Didn't love so much trying to learn to play them.
Once you get them, though.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant.
Leigh will back up, as we've just discussed as well. There's a substantial challenge that these things can present to the novice player.
I find that the way I sort of tend to teach them is I'll show them that although a bar chord can be quite daunting, if you look at it without the barred finger, what you've just got is an E and an A chord, major or minor. And the first step I always do is then get people to practice those E and A chords with their middle ring and little fingers, and then say, okay, well now move it up a fret and add the first finger in, and then all of a sudden then you've got the sort of the framework of what a bar chord is. But yeah, they're definitely hard to teach because obviously, as we all know from learning them, they're a nightmare to get going with. And whenever I'm working with someone on bar chords, I always say it's just something you have to commit 5 or 10 minutes a day and just hammer one of those shapes and really try and get your fingers to, to listen, because they are frustrating.
Yeah, but once you crack them though.
That's it. Yeah, once you get through the barrier, and it's always the same. People will have weeks and weeks of not being able to get them, and as soon as someone actually goes home and gets one, even if they're just getting 1 in 10, that'll encourage them then to keep trying, and then maybe the next weekend you'll get 2 out of 10 of them right every time, and it'll just keep building from that then. But I always, whenever I enter into barcodes, I always say to people, this is not going to be a chord that you'll get in an hour. This is going to be a a background grower.
Yeah, that is like I used the gym analogy earlier. That is a one where you have to work on it to try and get stronger, quicker, just to get through the, I don't know, pain barrier, I guess. Describe it.
No, there is a pain barrier to it because obviously you're exerting pressure on your wrist in a different way as well. That's the one, when I mentioned about videos and little things like your thumb placement, barcodes are a prime one for that, because I find that the best way to get your hand, because obviously a lot of people struggle with the idea that you bar them with one finger and then the other 3 fingers are sort of arched over. I find that the easiest way to get your hand into that position is to line your thumb up with your middle finger as you do the barcode. Right. And the people that I've shown that to seem to respond well to it. I couldn't tell you where I heard it because I can't remember, but it was one of those sort of things that came onto my radar at some point, and I thought, well, that kind of makes sense. And I tried it, and I was like, yeah, that does feel pretty good. And subsequently, showing it to other people, it seems to tick a few boxes of barcodes. So you'd have your thumb sort of on the curvature of the neck, but it'd be lined up with your middle finger. And I find that sort of centers your wrist. Whereas if it is off to the side, you tend to attack the barcode from a bit of an angle. But if you line your thumb up with your middle finger, it sort of straightens your arm out a bit. And I just find that makes the stretch a bit easier for people.
So barcodes are difficult, and it will take anyone a while to get to the point where they can nail them. So appreciating everyone is different. How long does it take, on average, to move from a complete novice to some level of proficiency?
Usually I find the magic time is normally 6 to 9 months for most people. Just to kind of, if I had to put an average on it, I'd say about that. Because that's the sort of point where I suppose you've gotten through some of the challenging things that crop up. And by that point, I think you've decided, this is for me. Because there is always that point where some people get up to and they learn so much and then they think, actually, do you know what? This isn't really for me. Yeah. So I think the first step of that is you've got to pass that point.
How many people stay the course? Like percentage-wise, how many people sort of even make it to 6 months?
At the moment, I've got quite a good retention. I think most of my students actually been with me for quite a while. I think some of my students I've had for probably 2 years at the moment. Okay. I've got a couple that I've had for at least a year. So I don't tend to lose too many to the dreaded 3-month curse at the moment. but it goes in phases, obviously, and it depends on who comes through the door. Because in the past, I've had, at one point I had 1 week where I think 5 people came to the same decision in the same week that that the guitar wasn't for them, and they were all around the same sort of point in their learning. But then other times you get no one. People will stick it out, So, but at the moment I'm finding a lot of people are sticking with it, which is good. But yeah, I do find that seems to be the magic amount. I think by that point you've invested enough of yourself into it to think, yeah, this is something I'm gonna, really push on with and see what I can do.
So you've got to that 6 to 9 month period. You're getting sort of okay. Mm-hmm. What do lessons look like then?
I often find that when you get to that sort of stage, the lessons become less practical, I suppose, and more about theory. Or not so much, not strict theory, but you talk a lot more about the concept of what you're doing. So, like, for instance, when you're talking about scales, or teaching someone how the shapes of the pentatonic fit together, it's not necessarily like right, let's practice this over and over again. It's more of a back and forth of you showing, right, these are where these shapes fit in, and look at these diagrams and working out the fretboard. So I think there's definitely more of that thinking involved in lessons when you get to that point. Right. And obviously, like I said, sort of talking about concepts and talking about things like, phrasing. How do you make a scale not sound like a scale?
What type of goals do people typically have after that period of time?
Usually, I often find that it's sort of the goals tend to shift to like a deeper understanding. So it's like, you know, you might say 6 months ago, I want to play, I don't know, Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah.
And if you manage to get there in 12 months, by the end of that year, then you might say, okay, well, now I want to understand it. I want to know, how is he doing it? Why is he doing it? And that's where the real fun starts in, because then you can start, you're not just learning stuff, you know, from a sheet. You're actually learning, I often say that's when you start learning how to play the guitar.
Mm.
You're not just learning something note for note, you're learning how to interpret things. And then you can take that stuff then and put it into your own playing. And that's where the fun really starts, because then you start to carve out your own sort of place in things.
What else can a student do to progress their guitar playing? This was a tipping point for us, I think, when we
It really was.
when we first started playing.
Yeah, when you hear drums playing with your guitar, it's almost like, wait a second.
This is like a song.
Yeah.
And I always say that to people, you know, like if you want to learn how to play guitar, play with the drummer, because the second you step foot in a room with another musician, you learn way more in the first 10 minutes than you've learned in a year in your bedroom.
Definitely.
Because all of a sudden, then you're not just listening to yourself; you're listening to everyone else, and that's what really pushes you in. Because I mean, when I started, I had a friend that played drums, and I think at this point I'd only been playing guitar for maybe 3 weeks or something, and I could only play sort of like 2 or 3 riffs, and he could only play 1 beat on the drums. But we got together and we just played those things over and over again, because when we first started playing them, we didn't really know how to interact. But by the end of the day, we were playing them tight. And we both learned something from that, you know, and it's like, actually, it's about listening as well as playing.
So there's loads more in the full episode with Leigh on interacting with other musicians. You'll hear that later in the series. He has a snippet.
The simplest thing in the world, if you can start to interact with other musicians, it helps your confidence with those things. Because, I mean, if I didn't do so much of that when I was younger, I definitely wouldn't have done some of the gigs that I've done like that. Because obviously, the idea of learning a set list and just showing up, and then it's like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're off. You know, you don't even know what that first note's going to be like until you play it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to almost trust yourself to say, do you know what, I can play with these guys, I can play with other musicians.
Ultimately, this will help if you ever want to play live in a band, which will be the case for a reasonable amount of people who are learning the guitar.
Definitely high percentage.
They just help your overall, I think, rhythmic skills especially. Like, you play with the drummer, it helps your ability to make decisions on the spot as well, which isn't something that strictly happens when you're a beginner of guitar. But as you progress, you know, you said, like, what does the intermediate stage look like? Part of the intermediate stage, in my opinion, is being able to develop your own sort of thought process of playing as well. So what if you're on stage and you've got this really hard bit coming up, and all of a sudden the drummer speeds up by 15 BPM?
Sounds familiar, James.
Yeah.
You have to make that instant decision, don't you, to say, right, okay, I need to change whatever I'm doing right now in the next 3 beats. So it helps you sort of learn those, you know, the things that you can just make a decision without thinking about it.
It's fair to say that our speed of play live, James, was somewhat variable. I'm not going to mention any names, but it starts with an R and finishes with an ob. But I totally agree with that point from Leigh.
I like the noise ob.
It's the best part of Rob, to be fair.
But yeah, we'd go slow, quick, slow.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a deliberate format.
No, and live was normally quicker.
No, yeah. A bit like Ash.
Oh, love Ash. And yes,
they would play 20 songs in the time it would have probably.
But one of the main differences between Ash and our band, James, was they did that intentionally.
Yeah. Fair play to them.
Mm-hmm. Good question to ask though, James. Is it useful to learn the other instruments?
I always fancied being a multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah.
Didn't really happen.
No. I can hit the drums, but whether it's in time or correct order is a different matter.
Do you know what? It's not something I've really ever come up against. Most people that I've taught don't tend to ever really express an interest in a second instrument. But I suppose it all ties in with your goals as well. Like, if you're going to be the type of person that, you might want to get into music because you want to write songs, then absolutely it's worth understanding at least what other instruments do. One thing I think is useful, and I suppose this kind of ties in with the idea of playing with other musicians, is if you don't play with other musicians, you should at least understand what their roles are in the band. Especially the big one for me was understanding what a drummer does. So if you can understand how a drummer keeps time, like what are they doing on certain beats in the bar, where does the kick fall and where does the snare fall, those type of things, that'll help you then if you're getting into writing. You kind of have a framework in your head then when you come up with chord progressions or riffs, you can say, okay, well, this will line up with the kick drum, or this will fit here or there. So I think at least understanding what other instruments' roles are is important, even if you don't necessarily learn how to play it yourself.
So whilst learning the role of other instruments can at least be a useful thing to do, what about another common question? Do you need to be able to read music?
I would say no, because I think a lot of guitar players don't read. I think, there's obviously a crowd of players who are very proficient readers, and those tend to be the people who do a lot of, the orchestra work or the sort of the film scoring work or even like the cruise ship stuff. But I think when you sort of think of your general guitar player that you see playing in a pub band or a touring band or just someone who plays for fun, most of those people don't read, especially proper music. I mean, I don't even think I know any guitar players that actually read in my sort of circle of people that I'm sort of friendly with. I don't think any of those. I know a couple of bass players who read and a couple of drummers, but not actually guitar players.
Which I believe cropped up in our interview with band leader extraordinaire,
Jamie
McCready.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned it at the time, and I'll mention it again. He hasn't shown me personally, but I've seen his pictures of the Book of Mormon soundtrack.
I knew you were going to mention the Book of Mormon.
But it's just the sheet music of that. I recommend anyone who's learning the guitar to not look at that straight away, because it'll put you off, because it just looks too daunting. But to someone like Jamie who can just go, yep, I know that. I mean, that's where you want to get to. Just like, yep, I can do that. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to get to. Not everyone wants to.
No, yeah, but like, yeah.
But depends where you want to go with the guitar.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a nice segue to next week's conversation, James. One final thing. What resources does Leigh rely on?
For, like, if I'm looking for chords for songs or tabs, I always use Ultimate Guitar. I find that to be the most sort of comprehensive sort of library of that sort of thing. If I'm looking for something a bit more informative, I tend to go down the route of a book. So I teach a lot of graded curriculum as well. So I find that the grade books are very informative if you're doing a bit of theory. But also the strange one that I came up against, which I thought actually is one of the best investments I've ever made, is that, those For Dummies books.
Oh, yeah.
They've done a guitar music theory one, and I think it's like the best £15 I've ever spent, because it explains theory concepts framed for guitar players in a really easy way to understand, and there's no sort of extra padding around the point. It's just like, this is what it is.
So, a long journey, potentially, but not an impossible one by any stretch of the imagination.
I am testament to that.
Fact. When you pick up a guitar and play a tune that you recognise, that can be a massively satisfying thing, though. Particularly the first time you make this thing produce a sound
Thing, yeah.
that is something that is vaguely recognisable. It's amazing. Additional news snippets from the interviews you've heard today will pop up in other episodes later in the season. And at the end of season 2, we'll release each conversation with all of our guests in full as standalone episodes. As a reminder, if you like the show, please take a few seconds just to give us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts from. It makes a huge difference in helping us grow our audience and promoting the show. Coming up next week, it's more from Matthew and Leigh as we talk about building a career in music that can be an alternative to being the ones up on stage.
You have to have that desire to be busy.
All of the show notes for today's episode can be found at acpgmusic.com, along with our back catalogue of episodes. If you like what you hear, or perhaps have some improvements or specific guests you'd like us to consider, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at info@acpgmusic.com or hit us up on social media. Keep supporting upcoming artists, and we'll catch you next time.